Welcome to the Blitz with Rob and Chris. Rob, what it do out there, man?
I'm chilling. I'm finally free. Been out the house a little bit, getting over this Rona. So, let's get it started, man. There's a lot of sports on TV.
Look, you got over the Rona, that hurricane, that tropical storm about to come.
Yeah, man. What they call it, Corona cane. This is a damn shame. Like, I can't, win for losing out here. But look, the way I see it, next weekend, all's going to be clear in Miami. And, I'm about to wreak havoc on these streets.
Look, I feel you. But look, before we get into sports, I've been trying to binge watch some stuff. So I finally found something I like. I got No Limit Chronicles, getting that Master P history in there. You checked it out?
Yeah, I watched the first episode, man. Listen, I got a lot to say about that. Master P first, like, he really painting that picture, making himself look like that dude. I mean, he did for New Orleans at that time great things. But it's just crazy to see how all that stuff played out. Him going to California, I don't know if I really knew how much time and how he really built things from over there in California. I just thought it was funny when he was putting Booker T. Washington High School on the map, like it was the school for like young, entrepreneurs.
Right.
That is not what I came up knowing Booker T. Washington High School as.
Look, I'll say this. Out of all that, I think, for us to get the pod to the next level, all we got to do is make some T-shirts and give it to some homeless people because they walking billboards.
Right, walking billboards.
That's what I got out of that.
And get all the dope men to carry around these CDs and play it in their Cadillacs. So.
I ain't gonna lie. Like you see, I didn't realize how much Richmond, California played in it, but I was talking to my wife about it, and you realize, like, as small of a city as New Orleans is, at one time we had the two hottest rap labels in the game. When you talk about No Limit and Cash Money, and you think about like now how New York, Atlanta, all that stuff is playing out, but at late '90s, New Orleans was the rap hub, so that's kind of like
crazy. I mean, we transitioned from one label to another. I also didn't really realize though that like how Pop gave him his start on the tour.
Right.
I knew I had heard him talk about Pop, but I didn't know that his like real first time getting out there on the road was with Pop.
Yeah, it's funny how the game is all intertwined. So
right.
I can't wait for episode Street Food this week. But I want to start off with that. But let's jump into it. Like you said, we got a busy week. Starting off with the NBA restart. We Pelicans fans. The Pelicans started out against the Jazz. What was your thoughts first on just the actual experience of the game compared to you had been watching baseball compared to MLB? What was your expectation and how do you think the NBA, the viewing of the sport looked?
So first of all, I'm gonna press pause on you for a second because you calling me a Pelicans fan. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, sir. Born in Brooklyn, New York. I'll always be a Knicks fan first. Let's just get that started. You see this NY on my hat. Yankees fan, I'll be a Knicks fan first. John Starks, Patrick Ewing, Charles Oakley, Anthony Mason. That was my introduction. That was my first real, fandom.
And you realize them dudes didn't play. They ain't played since like 1990.
Okay, but the Pelicans just came around. All right, the Pelicans just got a squad, and from Chris Paul to Anthony Davis into now the way we pissing off Zion, it looked like we can't keep a star. All right. So what I picked up from watching this game is the Pelicans are all over the damn place. I don't really know what this franchise has going on. We got blown out by the Clippers in game 2, but game 1 even, when we had a chance, we had Zion on this 15-minute restriction, which for the life of me I can't understand. And part of me thinks that we're already in planning for next season. Part of me thinks that as much as we talked about the NBA setting this up for Zion to get into the first round, David Griffin said, I got other ideas. We're building for the future. I'm not about to put a lot of pressure on Zion. Either is that or he's upset that Zion left the bubble and he's essentially punishing him by putting him on a 15-minute restriction.
Oh, that man hurt. That's what I think.
Or he's hurt, but from what you get from Alvin Gentry, the coach, and Zion himself, they seem to be upset about the way things are playing out. And some would argue that in that Clippers game, the whole squad quit because they felt like, why are we here?
Right.
But I will say the Portland Trailblazers look quite nice.
Yeah.
And I think we all owe Melo quite an apology. I started, 2 podcasts ago, I said rumors of my demise have been greatly overstated. Rumors of Melo's demise have been greatly overstated because he's out here balling in the bubble. I like Skinny Melo.
Skinny Melo looking good. That just show y'all that he cheated the Knicks. Man, stole that money and ran.
He kind of cheat us, right? He was eating good. He was at the, Peter Luger Steakhouse. He was out there enjoying himself in New York, giving us chubby Melo. Skinny Melo is balling.
He is balling.
And so on that note, right, the Trailblazers went into overtime. I think there's been 3 overtime games already. These games have been exciting. I like the way they set it up, right? Baseball, you see nothing but empty seats.
Right.
With basketball, they pipe in a little bit of crowd noise, plus the virtual fans. And they've been treating us to, like, you know, today the Celtics were playing and we got Paul Pierce as a virtual fan. When OKC was playing, I was watching that game. Chris Paul's son was a virtual fan. So it just gives you something. It's not Rihanna courtside at the Lakers game, right? It's not Jay and Beyonce at the Nets game, but it's still something that gives you conversation. Man, the NBA killed this. I don't really know how to say it. We talked about possible positive tests in the bubble because of, you know, the outside Disney workers. Come to find out, they've given the Disney workers the option of the same testing as the players. Thus, they've had no positive tests inside the bubble. You know, with the exception of Lou Williams and Strippergate, the bubble's been clean. The bubble's been clean. The games look good. It probably doesn't feel the same for the players because they don't have the screaming fans. But for us, it doesn't sound that different. It doesn't look that different.
Yeah, I was surprised. I thought it was going to kind of be, you know, just not the same. I thought the virtual fan thing was going to be kind of whack. But the way basketball is set up, you realize when you watch it on TV, I think back to when they had fans, and really the attention is not really on the fans. They might pan out every once in a while, but all the action is on the court, and there's so much back and forth. There's really no time to really pan out to the crowd. And I didn't think I was going to like the pumping fan noise, but it seems realistic. It like they know how to pipe it in at the right times, and so it gives the feel of a real game. And at this point in time, I'll take that over not having it.
Right, over no sports at all.
Yeah. So I've enjoyed it more than I thought, and the games have been exciting. The players seem that they've been into it. So you know,
one thing I will say, an element of all of this to kind of look at, I think there's some players who probably shrink in big moments in front of large crowds, and all of a sudden, you know, you got your boy Warren from the Pacers dropping 53, and we like, where the hell did this come from? Like when we had Josh Powell on the pod, he talked about gym runs. Yeah. I think for some of these guys, this is about to start to feel like a gym run. Yeah. Because you're really playing in front of your peers, and the virtual fans, they're not really there for you. You know what I'm saying? Right. Like you might see those faces, but it's not the same as when there's actual people shouting at you, 20,000 people booing you. Some people, I feel like that probably elevates their game. But for some people, they probably shrink, and now all of a sudden they don't have to deal with that. So I think that's going to be something to look at as the playoffs, you know.
Yeah, and it's limited, you know, media. Mm-hmm. It's limited cover. You can't hype it up. You can't have, you know, all these people on the court from like ESPN now, and so it's different. So like you said, it's going to be. I'm curious to see what the playoffs look like. It's no home court advantage,
right?
And so you wonder how that plays out, especially in the East, where, you know, like in the West, when you got LeBron, Kawhi, these are legit championship caliber guys who've won it before. But in the East, as good as we think the Bucks are, as good as we think Giannis is, they still haven't won.
I've been telling y'all, watch out for Miami.
Yeah, Jimmy Butler.
You put them in a bubble, now you take away all that travel, all that home court advantage. You got a bunch of young cats, a bunch of dogs. Like, I think it, you know, for like young teams that are really athletic, this is gonna benefit them to some extent, because the travel, the, you know, away fans, you eliminate all of that for them. And for these young cats, this is just like Wild World of Sports. They would have been playing AAU here potentially 3-4 years ago. Right.
And I start to wonder too what the fatigue level looks like for guys, because they're playing like back to back to back. And so talking about that, let's talk about LeBron coming back. He didn't look great. Yeah, he didn't look great first game. I'm repping my purple.
Did he look good the second game to you? Because he didn't look good the second game to me either.
You know, he looking old, bro. He looking like a guy who...
And did not text you when the NBA warm-up games were going on. And what did I say to you?
Hey, bro, look.
I said he looked a step slow.
Listen.
I said he looked a step slow. And it's all coming to fruition out there.
He's 36 years old. He played damn near a full season. He had a 4-month break.
Mm-hmm.
Now he got to get reacclimated.
Listen, I've been in this house with the Rona for a minute. If I step outside and just try to go run like early in April and March, I'd go hit 4 miles right quick, and it was boom. Like, I'd step outside, I'd probably get winded after a half a mile right now. I mean, Ron is, the same age.
It's a struggle out there.
And he was on Instagram and he showed himself after the game with the Clippers, and he was laid out on the floor. He said he couldn't even get to the shower. But with that being said, that was a great game. Problem for them is no Montrezl Harrell, no Lou Williams. When those two guys come back, that's 36 points a game right there, 18 and 18. And you won by 2 points. Paul George looks like a problem. Reggie Jackson looks like a problem.
Yeah.
How did the Lakers let that happen? But look, they still had Avery Bradley, they still had Rajon Rondo, right? And so Beverly was the starting point guard who's more of a defensive, not a scorer. Right. And so the Clippers would have been the ones trying to add offense. But that's a 13 to 15 point a game score that they've just added at point guard for the Clippers. That's going to be a problem for them. So you add back Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell. I just don't see how the Lakers win that.
Listen, don't get it twisted, right? LeBron knows how to win. He knows how to turn it on. These games don't matter. We just talked about home court advantage does not exist. I think they 8 games up on the Clippers in first place. So even if it did matter, I think they'd have that locked in. So this is calculating. LeBron is revving his body up for when it matters. This doesn't matter. I'm going to let the young fella AD eat.
Yeah, but AD didn't eat against Toronto.
Well, he didn't eat. That's why they lost.
No, he looked bad. He looked like he gave Clippers everything he had, and he was done for the next game.
And he got to get them young bucks. We got to get Danny Caruso.
And more importantly, the lack of Avery Bradley. Now you don't have the smaller guard to cover the Van Fleet and Kyle Lowry as the guards over there. And I think they're gonna suffer from that when Reggie Jackson catches his stride with that Clippers offense. That's who should be guarding him. That's who should be guarding Lou Williams. You know what I'm saying? Bron shut down Paul George and Kawhi Leonard on that last possession, but you still need Avery Bradley to be the one guarding your Lou Williams or Reggie Jacksons, whatever.
Right. But, you need a second perimeter defender.
Right.
But it's saying that, who do you see out of last 3 or 4 days watching all these games? What team has kind of surprised you, or what team do you think is a dog horse coming down into the playoffs?
Yo, the West is crazy, right? Because 1 and 2, so really 2 through 6 is separated by 4 games, right?
Right.
So you talking about the Clippers, and then I think it goes Denver, Utah, OKC, Dallas, Houston, then Dallas, right? And so when you go 2 through 6, you're talking about a 4-game spread. That's really important, right? So if I'm the Clippers, I'm facing Dallas. Dallas is a problem, right? We was 85-75 at halftime with the Rockets. Yeah. That team is a problem. They're impressive, but we expect that, right? They got, 2
all-stars.
2 young, really, really talented players. Porzingis, as I used to like to call him, he was with the Knicks.
Luka, a future MVP.
And Luka, right? So you got those 2 on a team that could create problems for the Clippers, right? But then OKC is impressive, but I feel like OKC is the type of impressive team that they play really fundamentally sound basketball, but I'm not scared of them. Say, for example, I'm the Lakers and I play the 8 seed Memphis Grizzlies in the first round, and then I play OKC in the second. Right. I'm not really scared of OKC. But if I'm the Lakers, I am scared of Portland as the 8 seed in the first round.
I'm with you.
Melo, Dame Dollar, and CJ McCollum will give the Lakers problems, particularly again without Avery Bradley to guard Dame Lillard.
Right.
So it's not one team in particular, I would say, but then you go to the Clippers, right? The Clippers could have Dallas in the first round and then fool around and have Houston in the second round.
Right.
I mean, we could see the Lakers and the Clippers might not make it to the Western Conference.
And Houston could be a problem with Westbrook and Harden. That's just 2 top 10 perimeter players. What you going to do?
You put your we're banking on the Clippers, right? Because the Clippers were fundamentally sound with Doc Rivers, and I think they were a 7 seed without Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, and they gave the Golden State Warriors a run for their money in that first round. So from our perspective, it's you give them 2 all-stars, 2 top 5 players. Boom. Paul George being top 5 potentially, and he's healthy, right? And he's healthy now. So, but I don't know. The playoffs are going to be fun to watch. I'm excited, man.
I'm going to tell you who I'm excited to see in the East. Toronto. Boston doing anything too, but I saw Toronto play the Lakers last night, and Kyle Lowry is balling. And I look at a series in which they play the Bucks, right? And yeah, you got Giannis, possible back-to-back MVP. But then you look at who's the best number 2, number 3 player in the series with Toronto and Milwaukee, and you're looking at Siakam and Lowry. I think both of those guys are better than the second best player on the Bucks. And so I think
there's just a lot of talent, youth, and length.
Exactly.
Even outside of them, right?
Exactly. And then you got Van Fleet coming off the bench. And, this team won a championship last year. And granted, they lost Kawhi. But you're talking about a team that knows how to win, that's confident. And you're talking about Lowry, who's been a multiple All-Star. So he doesn't lack confidence. And I don't think they're scared of the Bucks because they don't fear the Bucks. The Bucks have never won.
I don't think anybody fears the Bucks.
Exactly. Especially in the bubble.
Right.
So I'm excited to see what happens. But I'm looking forward to the playoffs. I'm kind of, the Pels kind of ruined the little 8-game thing for me.
A restart, but
yeah. So I'm kind of ready for the playoffs, but I do enjoy having something to watch. Speaking of something to watch, though, I tell you who don't have games to watch, and that's Major League Baseball. Miami Marlins had 18 players and 2 staff members test positive last week, and they canceled their whole week of games. After that, they played the Phillies. The Phillies first had no positive tests. Then they came back with some positive corona tests. So I think the Phillies have canceled 7 games, the Marlins 7 games, Yankees have canceled 4 games, on and on. I mean, Blue Jays, Nationals, Cardinals, Brewers. Cardinals just came out today. They had other positive tests come out the next day. So MLB is all over the place. They don't have a bubble, and the commissioners come out and said that, he's warned the networks that there could be possible threat to not finishing the season altogether. So what's your takeaway just from the restart for Major League Baseball and where they are today, 2 weeks into it?
So
a week and a half into it.
Again, I'd like to start by pressing the rewind button a little bit. And the Yankees are 7-1, and Aaron Judge is the early favorite for MVP. I think tonight he hit his 6th home run in 5 games to put us ahead of the Boston Red Sox in 9-7 victory. And it was like, yo, he hit that shit into like next week. So I don't care what nobody says. I'm rocking with baseball. I'm excited about baseball. We'll take our ring on the asterisk year, and then we're going to come back and get one next year. All right. But listen, this is just so poorly planned. It frustrates me. Right. Like, we talk a lot about like sports, the lack of like intellect. Sometimes it feels like in sports, it's like, yo, just because this is like something that takes like physical prowess doesn't mean that you have to lack brain power when you come up with ideas for this shit. Like, and so basketball had the bubble. I get that. There's just no excuse, because really baseball was supposed to start in April. So yeah, you should have been thinking of a bubble too. And me and you have talked about this so many times. There's two sites for spring training, right? There's Arizona and there's Florida. And the Florida sites are mostly South Florida, right? Mm-hmm. You could have limited your travel between 2 states, and then everything kind of be centralized between South Florida and not every team has their own spring training site. So some of the places were sharing, but you would have been able to set the schedule up while this team is present, this team is away. And
multiple games in a day, all that kind of
there
stuff.
May have been some concerns with dimensions of the field and how it would affect, like, Yankee Stadium is notorious for its short support and rights field. So you want to get somebody who can hit it out, blah, blah, blah. You want your pitchers to play to the stadiums that you have. So there may have been some concerns with that sort of thing. But when you're talking about just completing the season, they're already, 2 weeks in at this point?
Yeah, a week and a half maybe.
Threats of not completing the season, and it's just
already
from poor planning from my perspective. Miami, you knew Miami was a hot spot. Like Marlins Stadium, as far as I know, up until like a week and a half ago, was a testing site. Right. So it shouldn't be a surprise. You playing games at a testing site. You got 20 players test positive, no doubt, right? Because they walking into a bubble of Rona, right? Like, so how poorly planned it all was. I mean, if you don't create a bubble, what we now know from watching this, your team is subject to the ebbs and flows of the virus in the city that they live in.
Right.
How that's like some novel concept, I don't know. Like, you got all this money, all this research, potential, and you're still meeting this issue. I don't get it. It seems like the MLB commissioner is blaming the Players Association. And all that tells me is that likely maybe the Players Association was the one who was resistant to higher levels of restrictions. Yeah. I know we're hearing a lot of people just say that bubbles in other sports are logistical nightmares and impossible. But I don't see how that's the case in baseball, where you have where you already, before the season starts, play farm baseball.
Right. And that's my whole thing, right? And it has been some talk about, well, even if they did a bubble in Arizona and Florida, those two states are surging. That's not an excuse, because the NBA restart is in Orlando, which is in Florida, an hour and a half away from a couple hours from Miami. So from that perspective, that's why they call it a bubble. I don't give a damn where it's at. If it's a bubble, you self-contain.
You limit who comes in and who comes out.
Exactly. So
you rent out the whole hotel, and you tell the players, like, you can bring your family in now or never.
Right.
And now they don't come in until after the season.
I can tell you what's not a good idea: flying across the goddamn country to play in stadiums that got the same amount of people as my house.
Right.
Nobody. And so, like, that makes absolutely no sense to go in. And to your point about the field dimensions, and there's going to be some things that aren't best logistically, but at the end of the day, it's an asterisk season anyway. You're only playing 60 games. So records go out the window. All that stuff doesn't even matter. And so at this point, you just want to get through the game so you can play the players, you can live up to the contracts, to the TV deals, and kind of move forward.
And the Yankees can get their ring.
If you want to, but it's not ideal. But I mean, so in saying all that, what does baseball do from here? Like, do they try to create a bubble? Is it too late? If they don't try to create a bubble, do you envision a season finishing out in totality this year?
Personally, I think that they're going to make it work. I think they're going to finish out. I kind of think they're going to finish out because I think that a couple of things will happen. I think that the players, knowing that, this is teetering on the brink of disaster, right, will limit their movements within the cities that they live in. And then I also think that the teams are likely going to start to keep tighter reins on who comes in, who comes out, in terms of like travel. Obviously they're on team planes flying from city to city. So now you really need to be strategic and work hard to make sure that, the flight staff that you have them with, the hotels that they're checking into, all that stuff needs to be checked.
Right.
You know what I mean? Right. And so I think that they'll probably become more strategic in those areas. But I mean, look, daily we're getting reports of people testing positive. Juan Soto, he tested positive. I want to say somebody from the Phillies, a star player, may have just tested positive. But it's just, the issue becomes, once we start to approach the playoffs, can we guarantee that star players will be able to make their designated appearances in all the games, starting pitchers and position players? That's more my concern. And I think they will finish the season, but it's like, well, Aaron Judge is on a tear.
Right.
It'd be hell if Aaron Judge all of a sudden in a 5-game series contracts the coronavirus in the first round, and all of a sudden you're missing your best player, your whole lineup is thrown out of order, and you got 5 games in 8 days.
In the case of what's been happening too, like if Aaron Judge catches it, does that mean they canceled the game for the next 5 days? Because you don't know who might have a positive test come up in a couple of days. But we talk about it off the pod. But from what we see, baseball is not even following like a quarantine.
Baseball is tugging it.
Yeah, they like
baseball said all the Marlins are negative already and they ready to play. I'm like, just 10. It was 14 days and then the CDC reduced it to 10. Has it been 10 days? I mean, they just got up to 18 like 3 days ago. How can everybody be negative already?
Because they ain't swabbing their nose. I don't know what they swabbing, but
they getting them shallow swab. They giving real shallow swab. Oh, look, nothing on it. It's negative. Let's go.
So it start to wonder, like, now money's involved. What happens in these other sports without a bubble? Like, does that happen in football? And so kind of transition into football. Let's talk about
in NHL. Hockey has a bubble, as I understand it, right?
In Canada, it's like Toronto and Edmonton. Which I find kind of curious because they wouldn't let baseball come. But I guess it's because baseball didn't create a bubble. They are creating a bubble in NHL in those two cities. Mm-hmm. So Canada did okay that. But
they got that bubble right where it needs to be too. They knew better.
Right.
They knew better than to put that bubble in the United States. I mean, say the United.
They didn't flatten that damn curve over there. But talking about football, this is the next big sport that does not have a bubble. And so what happens? And there was a lot of back and forth with the players coming out with a unified front of, we want to play, but we need to know we're going to be safe. And there was some opt-out clauses. So people who the NFL came to an agreement with the Players Association, players who were deemed at high risk, which means the player themselves or their significant other who have been hospitalized or have been, proved to show that they had one of the symptoms or issues that were,
There's 15 issues that the CDC outlines. I notice as an attorney, because we've seen all this in court all the time. There's 15 issues, pre-existing conditions like high blood pressure, heart issues. If you have any of those,
type 2 diabetes,
right? If you have any of those, you're at high risk for death from the virus or some more severe long-term consequences from exposure to the virus. So
the NFL and the Players Association agreed if a player was under those conditions or their significant other in the house with them, they could opt out, receive $350,000 for the year, and get accredited year of service. If they didn't meet that criteria and they opted out, they would get $150,000, which I think goes against next year's cap. Or like they would order the team back, and they didn't get a year of service. And as I come to that conclusion, there's been multiple players who backed out, a lot of them who don't meet the qualifications. And just to name a few, you got Patrick Trump, Dante Hightower, along with like 5 other players. The Patriots have 7 total players.
They're up to 8 now. They had another one today.
Okay, you got Marquise Goodwin, Damian Williams from Kansas City, Eddie Goldman, defensive lineman from out of Florida State in Chicago. And so the issues have ranged from, family concerns. Dante Hightower and Marquise Goodwin both had babies in the last 3 to 4 months, and they don't feel comfortable going out there, risking their health and bringing it back home to small children.
And in my understanding is when you have a baby, there's like 6 months that they don't even have an immune system yet.
Right.
So they can't be exposed to any type of virus, right?
Yeah,
so you would essentially not be able to be around your child until the season was over.
Right.
Your newborn child.
And so, what's your thoughts, Rob, on just the pushback? Because there's been a lot of pushback from fans and media. They had Doug Gottlieb, who works for Fox Sports, FS1, came out and really, kind of questioned the players on social media, saying that if they don't want to come into the football stadium, are they really going to quarantine at home because they get tested more than anybody at the football facility than they will be, if they stay home? So what's your thoughts on kind of that pushback from fans and media calling these players selfish?
I mean, one of the difficulties, right, is that it's just an opt-in or opt-out. Like, you don't have a choice. You can't wait and see how it plays out and then come back. So you have to make the decision now. And so when somebody picks their family, it's hard to judge them in a negative way for that. Like, you're talking about not being in your newborn child's life for almost the whole entire first year of their life for football, and beyond just the child and the family situation, you don't know personally for yourself what will happen to you if you're exposed to the virus.
Right, long-term effects.
Right, any long-term consequences of being exposed to the virus. And realistically, we're talking about some of these guys with the Patriots who've won multiple Super Bowls, made a lot of money, and Tom Brady's gone. Let's just be honest. So for the first time in a long time, you feel like you might not necessarily be competing for a Super Bowl. And what's it to us if we don't do that well and we get a higher draft pick, right? We're under contract.
My boy can.
We're under contract and we'll be back next year. It's not worth the risk. I do think that plays into it for some people. And I can see why that annoys some of the fans, because you feel like maybe you're using COVID as an excuse to mail it in. But I just feel like it's one of these situations where the NFL failed to adequately prepare. Yeah. So if the NFL fails to adequately prepare with all their money and all their resources and all their knowledge, I'm hard pressed to blame the athlete on the back end for basically being like, I don't like what you came up with. Right. Do I think that maybe that could have been addressed earlier? Yes, potentially, but like it all depends on who has the power within the Players Association to get their voice heard. As we know, like 10 days ago, they were trying to force the NFL to answer some questions to the Players Association. So that's also on the NFL for not addressing these issues in advance.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like, from the opt-out perspective, I mean, like you mentioned, you don't know the long-term effects. And if there's any sport that is not conducive to playing during COVID, it's football. The sweat, the tackling, the face-to-face contact throughout the game. It's a breeding ground for COVID. So
they're within the offensive and defensive lines within a yard of each other, essentially face-to-face and smashing face-to-face on every play. Every
tackle, sweat dripping, breathing in each other's face. I mean, like, it's the ultimate sport to catch COVID.
If baseball can't control it, and their sport is built for social distancing, how in the hell is football going to control it with much larger rosters and much larger human interaction?
Exactly, and larger coaching staffs, larger training staffs. And so, again, when you can't control that outside environment, it only takes one person. And once that one gets on the football field, there's no isolation, there's no quarantine on a field. And so you get to, you start to think, but what's the ramifications of one person testing positive, and how does that impact a team, a game, a season? And so, unlike baseball, football cannot make up games with doubleheaders. You can't just postpone the game and put it on the back end. Every week matters, and you got dates set in stone and dates around Super Bowls in cities with hotels and all that. And so you just wonder like how all that is impacted moving forward, especially in football where you have so many limited weeks of play.
Yeah, like the Yankees canceled their games and then went and played the Orioles, right? So they just replaced with some games that were to come later. That's not happening in football, right? If a game for that Sunday gets canceled, I mean, you done flew like probably when you encompass the whole staff and everybody, like 100 people to a state and put them up in a hotel. Like if you have an outbreak on a team, you can't just be like, oh, let's go fly up to Baltimore. The people they were supposed to play had an outbreak, so now we can play them. Game planning, plays and scripts that you've written, and everything that you've designed is not set up for you to just go play another team like that.
And I think this year in football, like the backup quarterback will be more important than ever, because you're talking about right now we got two guys, Matthew Stafford,
Gardner Minshew,
who were starting quarterbacks last year, who both are on the COVID-19 list. And we're not really sure if that means they failed the test, they tested positive for it, or they interacted with someone exposed to it.
And we also today, Doug Peterson, the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, is on the list, and they said he tested positive twice. So.
And so how does that impact the team? If Sean Payton goes, he's the orchestrator of the Saints offense.
Hey, Sean Payton got the antibodies, baby. He tested positive early in the cycle.
We hope. And so I mean, all that matters, and I think all that is something that will impact the season going forward. So when you look at a team like the Saints that has Jameis Winston, that's huge. When you compare it to a team like Jacksonville, who has Gardner Minshew, who's average, so they damn sure don't have a good backup. And so you just wonder how that all plays and what the season looks like without training camp, without off-season conditioning and somewhat of a limited training camp. I'm still not sure on the details of training camp with contact and how they're gonna isolate and do social distancing while getting ready for a full season. Just don't know what that looks like. But with the players we listed, there's some good players, some Pro Bowl players, but there hasn't been a real big player come out today. Russell Wilson just had a baby. So for instance, what happens if a superstar opts out? What's the ramifications of a quarterback of his stature opting out? And do you see it happening?
I don't see it happening because football careers can be so short. Like right now, quarterback careers are lasting longer than ever, but every other position, every year matters. Yeah. Hall of Fame, statistic wise, every year matters. It does. Especially at the wide receiver position. This is a backlog, so many guys trying to get in. And for guys who don't win Super Bowls, the Hall of Fame is the only other thing they have to really hang their hat on with their career. You see nobody from the Saints. There were two guys who were essentially likely practice squad players. They opted out. I heard Donovan Smith, the left tackle from the Buccaneers, was thinking about opting out. That story quickly died, right? If you playing with a guy like Brady or Brees, who may be on their last year, I think there's added pressure for you to come back and play, which adds credence to your argument that it's a little bit of sabotage with Cam. Because like, it seems like when you check that list, the teams with quarterbacks that are up there in age or even just more skillful, like the Russell Wilsons, it's like
nobody opted out.
So like one person from I think it was Chance Warmack, a backup guard, I believe, for the Seahawks, opted out. So I think that a lot of guys in football won't opt out just because those playoff windows in football can be so small. You always hear football players talk about how that year with that team in that locker room is the only year that you have with that team in that locker room. There's so many players on one-year deals. The contracts aren't guaranteed. So many guys, even if they are on a multi-year contract, will be cut, right? At the season's conclusion. So I think that is a major incentive to play. Again, it's really interesting to me that you have 8 guys with the New England Patriots. I mean, we're talking about 53-man ultimate rosters. So how you lose 8 people off of a 53-man roster, and now at the end of free agency, like, you got to go build a team. I wouldn't be surprised, like, if Bill Belichick tries to go out there and sign. We're going to talk a little bit later about the top 100 list, but I think that Jadeveon Clowney and Logan Ryan are 2 players that are still free agents off the top 100 list. And I do believe that they get that salary cap money back for these guys who are not playing, other than the $350,000. So it'll be interesting to see if he tries to rebuild the roster around that,
or tank the season and draft Trevor Lawrence,
or tank the season and draft Trevor Lawrence, which doesn't bode well for Cam Newton. But
right. I'm not sold on it, but for Trevor Lawrence, but we'll see. But in saying that, we had right quick before we get to the top 100, as you mentioned. Antonio Brown was suspended for 8 games. That mean anything to you?
I mean, I think that it's in response to his announcement that he retired. I think that, like, he was essentially showing his frustration with the NFL because you froze him into a situation where he couldn't even negotiate with the team because he didn't know when he'd be available. So I think it was Roger Goodell's way of saying, look, here, we'll give you a final punishment, so now you can negotiate. I heard a lot of people talk about the Buccaneers. Where there's only so many balls to go around, right? But the Buccaneers also signed LaShawn McCoy at running back over this past week. So you talking about LaShawn McCoy at running back, Gronkowski, Mike Evans, Godwin. You still had OJ Howard and Cameron Brate at tight end. They don't, in my opinion, that's not where they're missing something. So that would make sense. I have heard a lot about the Ravens because his cousin is the other wide receiver there, Hollywood Brown, and so he's worked out. Lamar Jackson's a South Florida kid. He's from Palmetto Bay or something like that, somewhere South Florida. So they're all South Florida guys, and so they've worked out a lot together down here. So that's a possibility. That could be dangerous. That could be league altering.
Right.
I've heard that he worked out a little bit with Russell Wilson, another place that could change some things if he goes to the Seahawks. But as of right now, I'm not all that concerned about him just because I think his market is limited. I think maybe a couple weeks in, when teams start to realize, oh, we have a shot down the stretch, that's when you decide whether or not you're going to gamble on that locker room cancer.
I was going to say too, especially without having that offseason condition we talked about, there could be more injuries in the beginning of the season. So 8 games might not be bad. Give them a time to assess the market, see what injuries happen, see who's still in the hunt. And it could be, he worked out, he ran some routes with Odell Beckham. So, you can always throw Cleveland in the mix. But
I think and actually Cleveland starting with Jarvis Landry on PUP, on physically unable to perform list for some seat surgery he had last year. So, but I think the injuries are guaranteed. Like we see that every year coming into the first 2 weeks of training camp. You always see a bunch of torn ACLs and torn Achilles from guys who just like either overdid it in the training or underdid it in the training. So now you're talking about no train. I mean, well, they're gonna have their training camp, but you're talking about no preseason. Or we're gonna see some injuries to some star players in the first 3 or 4 weeks on some big teams.
So cool. So we're gonna see what happened there. But let's get to this debate. Top 100. NFL Network came out top 100 of 2020. Lamar Jackson, number one overall player. First, I just want to know if you agree or not. Yay or nay?
Nay. I mean, like, to me, when you talk about the top 100 players, I'm hearing what player, like if I'm starting my team, do I put on my team? And it, like, I'm hearing like a redraft in order from 1 to 100. So it's easy, and to me, it's a little lazy to just say, oh, well, you were the league MVP, so you must be the number one player. To me, top 100 says almost like, let's redraft. And if I'm redrafting and I'm going the first 100 in the draft, I think it's obvious that Patrick Mahomes is the first player. He was the league MVP the year before. And let's be real, like, had he not dislocated his kneecap, he probably would have been the league MVP the next year. He still came back and won the Super Bowl, was a Super Bowl MVP. So to me, he needed to be number one. Now, the players vote on this, and I'm not 100% aware of or sure of what the criteria is that they're given. Maybe they didn't vote for Mahomes because of how many games he missed. But to me, he would be number one.
See, so that's where we disagree. I think the purpose of the top 100 list is who had, if the players are voting, who was the best player in 2020, or 2019, 2020 season. And that was obviously Lamar Jackson. And I think we also get caught up in semantics when you talk about who's the best quarterback in the league. If you're thinking about traditionally what a quarterback is, a step back in the pocket, make every throw, yes, Patrick Mahomes comes to mind. But when I'm thinking about who was the best player in 2020, 2019, 2020, and who transcended the position, I'm giving it to Lamar Jackson. When I look at the stats, Lamar Jackson threw for 36 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Mahomes threw for 26 and 5. So yeah, Mahomes threw for about 1,000 more yards, but Lamar Jackson rushed for damn near 1,000 yards. And so I think a guy who transcended the position, especially in that season, I don't think there's any question. I think it's easy. Lamar Jackson was easily the best player in 2020, without a doubt.
So you're just gonna ignore the amount of games played, right? Like you're just gonna jump
To me, that matters, right? How could you be the best player if you missed 4 games, whatever it was?
How can you be the best player when you lose to the Tennessee Titans in the playoffs?
Hey,
how can you be the best player when all the team has to do is game plan and scheme you into the pocket and force you to make accurate throws and you can't win a game? Perfect. For me, I can't do it. I can't keep saying he's the best player. He's got limitations on his game, and the limitations are glaring such that they keep him from going to the next level.
So here's where you get it wrong with a lot of other people. You putting it into a bubble. Who's a better passer, game planning, but you got to throw we always talk about football as the ultimate team sport. So when you take a look at Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, it's more than just them. It's more than just their wide receivers. Who has the better offensive-minded coach? Mahomes. Mahomes is in the system that's created specifically for him. Specifically,
Lamar Jackson's not in the system that's
it is created for him. But who would you take as the offensive mind? Who's the better offensive mind if we're looking at Greg Roman or
Greg Roman created Colin Kaepernick, the guy you love so much. Listen, Lamar Jackson was 22nd overall in passing yards. 22nd overall in passing yards.
But he was 1 in rushing for quarterback.
For a quarterback, right? Yeah. But what position does he play? Quarterback.
So, but who says the quarterback has to only throw the ball?
The Tennessee Titans.
That's something you made in your
Tennessee Titans, when they forced him to stay in the pocket and asked him to throw that ball downfield, and he couldn't complete accurate passes. Listen, I was kind of embarrassed watching that game with the Titans. The level of inaccuracy in his throws. He just has another element to add to his game before he's there, and he doesn't have that yet. And I'm not going to call you the number one most overall valuable player. Listen, when you're playing 17 games or 16 games over a 17-week season, and defensive coordinators don't have as much time to prepare for you as they do when they get to the playoffs, I get it. You're gonna have some weeks where you show out just with your feet and you're running ability and you open up passing lanes. But if I've seen 2 years in a row when you get to the playoffs, all that shit just goes out the window and you're forced to throw the ball and you can't do it, I can't call you the number one player at the top 100.
And look, I'm gonna tell you this: the Ravens need a goddamn defensive coordinator that can stop Derrick Henry. You can't lose to a team when the opposing team's quarterback throw for 80 yards and complete 7 passes. That's coaching issues to me. I'm not putting all that on Lamar Jackson back. But sticking to the top 100, if we exclude the quarterback, so you take out Mahomes, you take out Lamar Jackson, Russell Wilson, who do you think is the number one player in the game outside of quarterbacks?
I mean, you got a couple of options, right? Obviously, Aaron Donald is up there. I mean, for years we heard about J.J. Watt, and Aaron Donald is what people consider to be J.J. Watt before. I mean, he wreaks havoc. The Saints was missing their starting quarterback for 5 weeks due to Aaron Donald. Mm-hmm. So just like that, he came in up the middle on some pressure and changed the course of our season and changed the course of that game. So I think you can't ignore him. It pains me to say it, but we got to put your boy, the White Panther, into the conversation.
See him run CMC.
1,300 yards rushing, I believe, 15 touchdowns, 1,000 yards receiving, 5 receiving touchdowns, 4 receiving touchdowns, something like that. And then Derrick Henry, to me, is the third guy who's got to be in the conversation. Like we just talked about, in my opinion, single-handedly carried them into the playoffs and through the playoffs. And he led the league in rushing, I want to say, and missed maybe 2 games. I don't recall him playing against the Saints in that late season matchup.
He didn't play against the Saints.
Right. So he led the league in rushing, having missed some games, and then carried them in the playoffs. So in my opinion, those are the 3 guys. If I had to pick one, I think I go Aaron Donald, simply because even when I looked at the top 100, I felt like defense was underrepresented. Offensive line was almost non-existent. And as we talked about with Benny, teams are built in the trenches. And so I think that was severely underrepresented. What Aaron Donald means, Khalil Mack was ranked low to me, Chandler Jones, just guys who get after the quarterback at a premium, but particularly a guy who can get after the quarterback up the middle to me. So I think Aaron Donald's the guy that I put.
So if I'm looking specifically at this, I'm looking at this past football season. I look at 2 guys. I'm looking at Derrick Henry and I'm looking at Stephon Gilmore. And that's because, like you said, nobody likes Christian McCaffrey more than me. I think he's the best running back in the league. But when we're looking at running backs, I don't see how Christian McCaffrey was ranked higher than Derrick Henry. When Derrick Henry led the league in rushing, yes, Christian McCaffrey's a better all-around back. Catches more passes, more.
1,000 yards receiving is a lot.
Yeah, but when I'm looking at, the player also has to contribute to wins and losses, right? Like what made Lamar Jackson number 1? His team was the number 1 seed, I believe, in the AFC, and so his team won. And Christian McCaffrey won, I think, maybe 4 or 5 games last year with Carolina. So the fact that they fed him may be indicative of the lack of talent around him for one, but also his production didn't produce wins. Derrick Henry led the league in rushing. He had average quarterback play at best, yet his team not only went to the playoffs, but went to the AFC Championship with his quarterback, Ryan Tannehill, completing 15 passes and 2 playoff wins for a total of 150 yards. That's the epitome of value in making a difference for your offense. A team knowing you're going to get the ball and you still churn out the yards, control the clock, and win games with no quarterback play to be spoken of. So I look at him, and then I look at Stephon Gilmore. A cornerback that can shut down one side of the field, especially in a defense setup like Bill Belichick, where he only needs one shutdown and he can basically scheme around everybody else. And so when I look at who's the best player outside of quarterbacks, I'm looking at what player can dominate his position, but also help create wins. And Aaron Donald's team didn't make the playoffs. And they didn't. The defense was average at best on as a whole. So I'm looking at how are you as a disruptor in your position, but also how do you contribute to wins and losses and dominating your side of the ball. And I'm not taking anything away from Donald or McCaffrey, but the fact of the matter is their play didn't produce wins. And so if I'm looking at that, I go Derrick Henry 1, and then Stephon Gilmore 2. But like you mentioned, I do think there's a lack of appreciation for offensive linemen in this list over the years altogether.
And Tre'Davious White, to me is
LSU.
Valuable. Like Jalen Ramsey to me is up there, but he didn't have a great year last year.
Right.
And So to me, Tre'Davious White was right up there with Stephon Gilmore in terms of what he did this year.
Definitely agree, LSU man, and I think a lot of this too has to do with reputation, right? So like I would expect Tre'Davious White next year, regardless of the year he has, to be in the top 25 because of the play he's done over the last 2 or 3 years. So I think a lot of it also has to do with reputation, which is why you're gonna see the Donalds, Gilmore's, top 10. Christian McCaffrey, I'm sure, will be back. So we'll leave it at that and go on to NCAA football, college football. There's been a lot of news going on in college football that we want to get to. First thing is the Big Ten and the Pac-12 made the move a long time ago, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, that they were going to conference-only schedules. And some people thought that they kind of jumped the gun. SEC, ACC, and Big 12 kind of wanted to sit back, maybe create a schedule where they could keep some of their rivalries, specifically the ACC and the SEC. So the ACC came out earlier this past week and said that they were going to go to a conference-only schedule +1 model, which meant they were going to leave one game open out of conference. And that was to protect some of their rivalries like Florida State, Florida, Clemson, South Carolina, Georgia Tech, Kentucky, Louisville, and Virginia, Virginia Tech. And what happened was the next day after the ACC comes out and says conference +1, SEC comes out and said, nope, we're moving to conference only, which basically eliminated the whole rivalry aspect that the ACC was trying to preserve. So first, I want to talk a little bit about that, Rob. As an ACC fan, as a Florida State fan, what's your take on SEC, coming behind them and eliminating that? And how do you feel about the Florida State-Florida rivalry, one of the long-standing rivalries being basically eliminated this year?
I mean, y'all SEC fans talk so much trash every year that I live for the rivalry games on the years that I know the ACC is up, because it's just a reality check and a wake-up call for y'all. I know that even if we win all of the games, or we win over 50% of the games, y'all gonna say that the games don't mean nothing to y'all, because that's what the SEC does. When y'all lose, y'all just be like, this was a meaningless game to us. When y'all lose bowl games, this is a meaningless game to us. We only play for national championships and big games, blah, 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 blah. But, I mean, there's some long-standing tradition there. And I was looking at some of the numbers, like the amount of years consecutive that some of these games have been played. 111 years consecutive for Clemson and South Carolina, 62 consecutive for FSU and Florida, 95 for Georgia Tech, 26 for Kentucky and Louisville. I mean, that's just tons of college football tradition out the window, which is crazy. I mean, some of that probably covers the last pandemic, probably. Yep. The Georgia Tech, what was that? The 111 years probably covers the 1918 pandemic, the Clemson South Carolina game. So just that huge break in tradition, and it's going to be really hard when you're talking about playoff selection committee. I just don't know how this is going to go. When you don't have a basis for comparison across conferences, you don't have similar opponents. How can a committee get in a room together and decide who's really better than who when you're only playing in your conference? And even the non-Power 5 schools that you would have played similarly out of conference, that's gone. So everybody's only playing each other, right? So, I mean, obviously that benefits the SEC because they have the best reputation. Right. So for them, they benefit the most by not playing everybody else. But for the ACC, Big 12, Big 10, Pac-12, how do you look now when you only play each other and your reputation generally year in and year out hasn't been that good?
Especially when the main issue with the playoff system is it's only 4 teams, but 5 Power 5. You got Power 5 conference, right? So it's 5 of the big dogs.
And every year there's a fear that you might get 2 SEC schools in there.
Right. And so now with the conference-only model, we know for sure one conference winner will be left out. And there's no cross-conference games to say, like, Alabama beat the Big 12 champion, so they should deserve to go over that. So you won't have that this year. So basically, one conference is going to get left out. And like you said, we know it ain't going to be the SEC because we've been repping. But as they go to conference-only models, though, the shift, some people are talking about they actually like the model that now you get to every game counts, every game matters, and I don't have to see LSU play Nicholls State, or I don't have to see Florida State played Bethune-Cookman, or
Yeah,
or
that's fine, but that's fine, but at the same time, they don't have preseason in college football.
Agreed.
So sometimes we just had those games to kind of get some of the kinks out of the way and see where your team was at before you got to the bigger games. Sometimes those games were for players who are going to be stars in future years to get out there and get their feet wet a little bit. So I think the true fans still appreciated those games. And realistically speaking, at least in the ACC, that might only be one game per season. I know in the SEC, y'all claim that y'all schedule so hard, so y'all play like 3 schools like that. But in the ACC, we only play 1 game like that. So that wasn't really a lot, for us to be worried about. Usually you got that ACC kickoff game where, I think it's usually like an ACC SEC kickoff game. And I think that Florida State would have played Boise to start the year this year. LSU would have played Texas early in the season.
Right.
Those are some big, exciting games for college football that are now just gone. And you jump straight into conference. And depending, like, for the ACC, Clemson has jumped so far out above the rest of the conference that it's really not that exciting for a lot of the games.
Right.
Big 12, Oklahoma has jumped way out in front of the conference.
Right.
So without those kind of measurement games for them outside the conference, you're talking about a 1-game schedule for a lot of these teams now. Clemson, Florida State, Oklahoma, Texas, Michigan, Ohio State. You've really reduced the importance of the rest of the game. So you could argue they all matter, but the spread, the predicted outcome for most of these games is predetermined.
And I mean, I think as fans who go to games, you want every game to matter and every game count, but I don't think that's the realistic to expect that colleges want that, right? The Vanderbilts and the Kentuckys need those non-conference games, cupcake games, to get bowl eligible. And so I don't think realistically long-term that's a model we can count on. And then, like you said, there's no preseason, and you got to get players warmed up. And I think there's going to be more injuries when you're going all out game 1, week 1, and your starters got to play the full game. LSU's breaking in a new quarterback in Miles Brennan. He doesn't get an opportunity to get the kinks out, to get the nerves out as the new starter. And so I don't think this is a realistic long-term impact on schedules. I think they'll go back to the 3 non-conference games or whatever, and keep those rivalries alive for those cross-conference rivalries. So, but I want to touch on that just to see, because that's some people have been talking about it and might be something they're looking at. But there's another thing that happened today, actually, that dropped, and that was Pac-12 players formed some kind of a semi-union. So I wanted to get your law background into this, and basically sent a list of demands to the Pac-12 Conference and Commissioner, Larry Scott, saying that they have a list of demands that include they want more safety precautions put in place if they are expected to play during COVID. They want to split the revenue for the sport they play in college 50-50 across the board in all the sports, based on the revenue you generate in your particular sport, along with some other demands that they listed. But just from a legality standpoint, what's your thoughts on them coming to the table with this, and how much leverage do they realistically have?
So you didn't give me like a minute to talk about a 2-hour conversation. You got a minute. So let's try to work fast. Let's try to work fast. Listen, so it's not just the Pac-12, right? Because the SEC players had a conference call with the SEC commissioner and some, higher up staff. That conversation was leaked. That conversation it does not present well for the leadership of the SEC in terms of what they plan. Everything that we've talked about in every other sport applies to college athletics. The issue is this: within professional sports, we've already talked about the Football Players Association is able to go to the table in representation of the players and come up with, the league what they want, the $150,000 payout, the $350,000 payout, if you so decide not to play. Here, you have college kids individually by conference discussing what the plan is with conference commissioners. They're not similarly situated. They don't have legal representation. They're not unionized, so they're not actually one body. They're on these phone calls as individual college students talking to professionals, right? medical, legal, and just university presidents about what their options are. They're not, there's no balance, right? But I think what it comes to demonstrate for the players in both the SEC and the Pac-12 is what their actual power is, because these individuals, kind of like Master P said, if this guy is offering me, what he say? If he's offering me $1 million, I must be worth 10 times that.
There you go.
So for these college players, they're sitting at these tables with these commissioners and these doctors, and they're wondering to themselves, if they're bringing me to the table to have these high-level conversations, they must really, really need me financially. SEC players pose some really valid questions. Why are we bringing the students back to campus? You're telling me that I shouldn't test positive for the betterment of the school, but I have no control over the students who I sit in the classroom day to day with.
Right.
And the commissioner is straight up telling them, we need the kids in school in order to justify putting you out on the football field. And we expect some positive tests, but that's just part of what is going to be part of this process. The follow-up question, what are long-term ramifications of me testing positive? The doctors say they don't really know. Right. So everything that the Pac-12 athletes are asking for is to address all of the concerns that these SEC players are discussing in their conversations with higher ups. They're asking for that and some. I've already said on previous podcasts, a 50-50 revenue split, probably unreasonable. The NFL, I think, was at 47%, 48% now with the new CBA. So to ask for that as a college athlete, ambitious, but obviously in any negotiation, you need a starting point. So they'll negotiate from the 50%. And what's interesting is that they want 50% of the revenue that their sport generates. Correct. Which generates this entirely different conversation, that's probably problematic because of Title IX, which requires some split in male and female sport revenue. But it brings up this conversation of how much does each sport actually generate? Right. Colleges love to claim most of us operate, in the red. Yep. But the reality is a lot of that is a function of creative accounting. I think they said 20 out of 1,000 Division I schools actually generate revenue. But as we've done some additional research ourselves, a lot of that is because of creative accounting and just overspending, massive overspending on college coaching contracts, on facilities, and all of these different things. And so if you spend enough on facilities, it looks like you're not making any money, right? You spend enough on salaries, it looks like you're not making any money. And so these players, the Pac-12, are basically saying, cut some of that. Right. Cut the athletic department salaries. What's ironic is that, like, when you look at college tuition, college coach salaries, college athletic department staff salaries outpace the college scholarship of athletic departments. So they're paying more to the coaches and more to the staff than they are for the kids to go to school. Right. And it's debatable whether or not it even really costs that much for the kids to go to school. So there's a lot to this conversation. I think the Pac-12 players are on the right page. I think never will they have more leverage than they do right now, where these schools are desperate. And so I think they're making the right moves. And at a certain point, you almost, if you're the schools, you almost start to wonder if they might want them to be represented by counsel, because it's hard to represent to go against 18 to 21 year olds who have no legal knowledge and try to engage in negotiation with them. Yeah.
And if not now, when? I mean, this is the player's time to do it. And to your point, just to go back to it, we talked about the lack of schools that produce revenue or net income from the athletic departments. It's around 20. But when you look at specifically football, I think that number jumps up drastically, because a lot of football programs make money. But then when you start adding in the men's golf, the women's swimming, tennis, and all those other sports that are non-revenue generating, that's when athletic departments, along with creative accounting, kind of create a deficit.
Right. So you have too many coaches on staff. You have too many sports at your school. You built too many facilities. You paying your coaches too much. That's why you in the red, not because you can't afford to pay the athlete.
I see Clemson got a $55 million football facility with a slide. Right. Alabama just spent $16 million on the locker room. LSU spent $28 million on the locker room with sleeping pods. They got dorm rooms. They don't need no beds.
Right. And they're paying all of their coaches $7 to $10 million a year.
Right, exactly.
And they say they don't have any money to pay the athlete.
They got analysts that they're paying that they can't even coach on the field.
Right.
So it's just at a certain point, like that money is being spent on things that these players can only experience or benefit from for 2, 3, 4 years, and not being compensated for the expectations, the work, and the product they put on the field. So we're gonna end it there, man. But anything you got before we?
Now we over our time, but this is a good conversation that I really think like the coming weeks are going to provide for, because we got another month before these final decisions are made. So we're gonna have a lot of time to talk about this, but it's interesting to see it unfold,
I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about it, and the college football season got pushed back. I know SEC is not starting until the end of September, so I'm sure, like you said, it'll be a lot more to talk about in future pods. So
if it happens,
right. So we'll get into it next week.
If any sport that I think that could be in danger of not being played, I think it's college football.
I don't see it happening personally.
One other small conversation to look for, right, is this whole idea that now the NCAA is being pitted against the Power Five, because the NCAA has to represent the interest of the schools as a whole, and the Power Five are the schools that make money. The Power Five has the interest to play. The rest of the schools in the NCAA model want to push football back and all fall sports back to spring if possible. Right. So now you're talking about the Power Five trying to break from the NCAA and do their own thing. So it's going to get really complex. Again, it begs the question, why are they just starting this conversation now? But, here we are.
So, there we go. So we wrap it up like that. Catch y'all next week.
All right, we out of here.
Later.